I thought raising my stepdaughter Megan was the hardest thing I'd ever do, but that was before I found the pregnancy test hidden in her college dorm room. The one that wasn't hers, a discovery that would tear apart the very foundation of our family and reveal a ghost walking among the living. The discovery unspooled a single fragile thread that would lead to a web of lies so vast and intricately woven it threatened to unravel the very fabric of our family, forcing me to question everything I thought I knew about the man I loved, the daughter I had raised, and the nature of truth itself. My life, which had felt so stable and defined by love and duty, was about to be plunged into a shadowy labyrinth of decades-old secrets, where the dead did not always rest in peace and the living were prisoners of a past too painful to confront. I met David when I was 34, a successful graphic designer who had, perhaps subconsciously, prioritized the controlled chaos of my career over the unpredictable complexities of marriage and family. He was 37, a charismatic and slightly rumpled history professor whose eyes held a gentle intelligence that drew me in immediately. He was a widower, a fact he shared with me on our third date, his voice tinged with a sadness that felt both profound and dignified. His wife, Sarah, had died in a tragic car accident when their daughter, Megan, was only 6 years old. Megan was 10 when David and I started dating, a quiet, intensely bookish girl with eyes that held a deep, lingering sadness far beyond her years. My heart went out to her instantly. Having lost my own mother to a long illness when I was 12, I recognized the hollow ache of a profound and irreplaceable absence. David was fiercely, almost obsessively protective of Megan, which I found both admirable and at times slightly puzzling. He spoke of Sarah with a tender, unwavering reverence, keeping her memory alive through carefully curated stories and a gallery of photographs that dotted their comfortable, slightly cluttered home. He explained that the accident had been particularly traumatic for Megan, who had been in the car but miraculously survived with only minor physical injuries. The emotional scars, however, ran deep. She rarely spoke of her mother or the accident, and David advised me gently but firmly not to push, explaining that it was a pain she kept locked deep inside, a vault he was careful not to disturb. We took our time, building our relationship with a deliberate slowness that respected Megan's fragile world. For the first year, our romance existed in the margins of his parenting life. Mostly dinners and movies after Megan was asleep or on the weekends she spent with Sarah's parents, who lived a few hours away. I slowly, patiently integrated into their lives, starting with small, non-threatening roles. Helping with homework. I was always better at math than David, the humanities professor, and then progressing to attending school plays where I sat in the back row and driving her to friends' houses. Megan was slow to warm up, her politeness a shield against my presence. Her resistance felt like a typical preteen adjustment to a new woman in her father's life, compounded by the looming, perfect ghost of a saintly mother. I was determined to be patient, to earn not just her acceptance but her trust. The breakthrough, the moment the fortress walls around her heart truly began to crumble, came on an unremarkably rainy Tuesday evening. David was held up at the university with a department meeting, and I was at the house with Megan when it happened. She got her first period. She was terrified, confused, and utterly embarrassed, locking herself in the bathroom and refusing to come out. I calmly talked to her through the door, my voice steady and reassuring, telling her it was perfectly normal, nothing to be afraid of. I then drove to the pharmacy through the downpour and returned with a discreet bag containing everything she might need. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I simply showed her what to do, made her a cup of chamomile tea and put a warm heating pad on her stomach. She didn't say much, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she let me sit with her on the couch. Let me put a blanket over us both while we watched a silly romantic comedy. That night as she headed to bed she looked at me and said, "Good night, Clara," instead of the usual mumbled night. It was the first time she'd used my name. A few months later she tentatively called me Mom by accident when asking me to pass the potatoes at dinner. The look of shock on her face was followed by a slow, shy smile from both of us. We never looked back. David and I married in a small, intimate ceremony when Megan was 12. I officially moved into their home and our family felt whole, complete. I was the one who helped her navigate the treacherous, shark-infested waters of middle school social hierarchies, who held her hair back when she had too much wine at a high school party and lectured her about safety, who stayed up all night with her, debating the merits of various college majors. David was a loving but often distracted father, buried in his academic work, his books, and the carefully maintained legacy of his first wife. The day-to-day emotional labor of parenting, the heart-to-heart talks, the crisis management, the unending reassurance, fell to me and I cherished it. Megan was my daughter in every way that mattered. She confided in me about her dreams of being an art historian, her fears of not being good enough, and the agonizing drama of her first love. She even started asking me questions about my life, my career, showing an interest that made me feel seen not just as a mother figure, but as a person she genuinely cared about. Utting in my ears. Two bold, unmistakable pink lines stared back at me. Pregnant? The words screamed in my mind. Why hadn't she told me? Was this the source of her recent withdrawal? A mix of concern and a strange, hurt confusion washed over me. I confronted her as calmly as I could the moment I emerged from the bathroom, holding the damning plastic stick between my fingers. Her reaction was not what I expected. Instead of fear, shame, or even tearful confession, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic, followed by a strange, forced confusion that didn't reach her eyes. What? That's not mine, she insisted, her voice cracking and rising an octave too high. She actually took a step back from me as if I were holding a weapon. Megan, it was in your bathroom, I said, my voice gentle but firm, trying to pierce through her bizarre denial. Under the sink. Are you okay? You can talk to me about anything. It must be my roommates. Leah's been seeing some guy. She's so messy she probably just left it in here and forgot about it. It's nothing, Claire, I swear. It has nothing to do with me. The use of my first name after years of consistently calling me Mom felt like a small, sharp slap. But it was the sheer, unvarnished terror in her eyes, a look I had never seen before, that convinced me she was lying. Something was very, very wrong. I dropped it, not wanting to cause a scene in her dorm room, but the seed of a deep, unsettling doubt was planted, and it began to grow thorns. Back home, the incident gnawed at me, an unsolved mystery that poisoned my thoughts. The easy explanation, a secret pregnancy, didn't fit with Megan's character or her reaction. The panic seemed disproportionate. Driven by a growing unease, I decided to do a little digging, something I'd never done before, something that felt like a violation but was fueled by a desperate need to understand. I logged into the family phone plan account, thinking perhaps I could find a number for this mysterious boyfriend, a clue to her secret life. Scrolling through the records for Megan's line, I found nothing unusual. Lots of calls to me, to David, to a number labeled Leah roommate. It was all perfectly normal. But then, on a whim, a cold finger of intuition tracing my spine, I checked David's call history. And there was a pattern. A number with a local area code to Megan's university town. He called it, sometimes for an hour or more, with a frequency that was unusual for a work contact. It was a number not saved in his contacts, just a string of digits that appeared week after week, sometimes late at night. A number he had never mentioned to me. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach, thick and heavy. Was David having an affair? Was that the secret? Was he using his trips to visit Megan as a cover for a liaison? The thought was nauseating. I copied the number and, using a paid reverse lookup service online, I discovered it was registered to a Vanessa Miller. The name meant nothing to me. With trembling fingers, I searched for her on social media. Her profile was private, but her profile picture was clearly visible. It was a woman in her late 30s with a warm smile and kind eyes framed by soft brown hair. And she was the spitting image, a near-perfect doppelganger of Sarah, David's deceased wife, whose photos I had lived with for years. My mind raced, trying to fit the jagged pieces together. Was David having an affair with a woman who looked like his late wife? It was creepy, unsettling, but it somehow made a twisted kind of sense. A man unable to let go, seeking a replica of his lost love. But why was he calling her so often? And what, if anything, did this have to do with Megan's strange behavior and the pregnancy test? The two mysteries seemed to collide in this one woman, Vanessa Miller. Driven by a mix of heartbreak, determination, and a fierce need to protect Megan from whatever this was, I took a step I never imagined I would. I hired a private investigator. I gave him the number, the name, and what little I knew. The truth he uncovered over the next 2 weeks was more shocking, more layered, than any simple affair I could have imagined. The PI's first report was straightforward. Vanessa Miller was not just a random look-alike. She was Sarah's younger cousin. They had been close as children. And she had been living in the same town as Megan's university for the past 15 years, working as a librarian. The report included grainy, long-lens photos of David having coffee with Vanessa in a quiet cafe. Their body language was intense, leaning close over the table, but it didn't look romantic. It looked more like a tense, urgent business meeting. There were no intimate touches, no kisses. It was the posture of conspirators, not lovers. Then came the bombshell, the photograph that made the floor drop out from under me. The investigator had managed to get a shot of Vanessa leaving her apartment building, walking to her car. She was wearing a loose-fitting sweater, but there was no mistaking it. She was noticeably, undeniably pregnant. The pieces began to click into a horrifying, unbelievable mosaic. David's frequent trips to academic conferences, that always seemed to be near Megan's university. Megan's secretive behavior and her panicked denial about the pregnancy test. The pregnant cousin of the deceased wife. A terrible, monstrous theory began to form in my mind, a story so dark I could barely entertain it. What if the baby was David's? What if this entire elaborate structure, the grief-stricken widower, the tragic accident, was an elaborate lie to cover up a long-running affair? And where did Megan fit into this? Was she protecting her father? Was she involved? I confronted David that night, my heart pounding like a drum. I laid out the PI's photos and the printed phone records on our dining room table, the evidence stark under the warm glow of the chandelier. His face, initially flushed with anger at my snooping and the invasion of his privacy, underwent a terrifying transformation. The anger drained away, replaced by a pallor of sheer terror, and then finally, it crumpled into a heap of utter despair and shame. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and began to cry, deep, ragged sobs that seemed to tear him apart. The story he told in broken sentences over the next hour was beyond my wildest, darkest imaginings. It was a story of a lie so profound it had defined their lives for over a decade. Sarah had not died in a car accident. She had left him. The story of the fatal crash was an elaborate, cruel lie, fabricated by a humiliated, desperate man to protect his young daughter from the shame and soul-crushing confusion of her mother abandoning her. Sarah, he explained, had struggled with severe postpartum depression after Megan's birth that never really lifted. She felt trapped, suffocated by motherhood and the responsibilities of married life. One day when Megan was 6, Sarah simply walked out, leaving a brief, devastating note saying she couldn't do it anymore, that she was sorry, but she was drowning and had to save herself. She asked him to tell Megan she had died, believing it would be easier for a child to process a tragic death than a willful abandonment. Devastated, humiliated, and terrified of the social stigma, David had taken her at her word. He invented the car accident. He told everyone, including a traumatized 6-year-old Megan, that mommy had been killed instantly by a drunk driver. He'd even staged a funeral with a closed casket, a macabre theater of grief attended by friends and family, all mourning a woman who was very much alive. Sarah's parents, heartbroken and equally ashamed of their daughter's actions, had, after much pleading and arguing, gone along with the lie. They believed, as David did, that a clean, tragic break was better for Megan than the messy, painful truth of rejection. For years the lie had worked, created a stable if sorrowful narrative. Megan grew up worshipping the memory of a perfect, loving mother who was tragically taken away. But a year before Megan left for college, Sarah, through her cousin Vanessa, had made contact. She was sober, stable, and living a quiet, anonymous life. She was remorseful and wanted more than anything to know her daughter. David, terrified of losing Megan's love and having his monstrous lie exposed, had agreed to a gradual, secret reintroduction. Vanessa was the intermediary, the safe channel. The plan was for Megan to accidentally bump into Sarah near campus, believing her to be a new friend of Vanessa's, a kindly woman interested in art history. The pregnancy test was Megan's. But the baby wasn't from a college boyfriend. The father was a man Sarah had been briefly involved with, a relationship that had since ended. Megan had taken the test at Vanessa's apartment, panicked and confused, just weeks after Sarah, in a moment of emotional urgency, had confessed the entire truth to her. The test was in Megan's bathroom because she'd brought it back to her dorm to process the twin shocks of her mother's resurrection and her pregnancy alone, in private. Sarah's pregnancy, a late-in-life surprise, had prompted her to finally push for the truth to come out, wanting her new child to know its sister and to live in the light. Megan had been living with this colossal, life-shattering secret for months, sworn to secrecy by a desperate David and her newly resurrected, emotionally volatile biological mother, forced to pretend her mother was dead while simultaneously building a fragile, secret relationship with her. I was speechless, my mind reeling. The scale of the deception was staggering, a multi-layered fiction that had been maintained for over a decade. David had not only lied to me for our entire marriage, but he had forced Megan to carry an unbearable, soul-crushing burden. Her distance from me wasn't about rejecting me. It was about being trapped in a labyrinth of lies where she felt she couldn't trust anyone, especially the woman she saw as her rock. She was protecting her father from exposure, protecting her mother from judgment, and protecting herself from the utter collapse of her identity, all while dealing with the existential shock of her mother's return from the dead and the complicating factor of a new sibling on the way. I didn't know what to do or feel. The ground had vanished beneath my feet. I felt betrayed on every conceivable level, as a wife, as a partner, and most painfully as a mother. I packed a bag mechanically, my hands shaking, and went to a hotel. For 3 days I didn't speak to David. I moved through a fog of grief and rage. My first overwhelming instinct was to file for divorce, to sever all ties with the man who had built a life with me on a foundation of quicksand. But my thoughts kept returning to Megan. She was the true victim in all of this, a pawn in a game orchestrated by the adults who were supposed to protect her. She was pregnant, scared, and caught between 3 flawed parents, 2 of whom had built her entire life on a foundation of sand. She needed me now more than ever, even if she didn't know how to ask. I checked out of the hotel and drove straight to her university. I found her in the art history library, hunched over a massive tome on Renaissance painting, her face pale and etched with exhaustion. When she saw me, her carefully constructed composure shattered. She burst into tears, great heaving sobs that echoed in the quiet study carols. We found a deserted conference room, and with the door closed, the whole story tumbled out. The initial shock of Sarah's revelation, the confusion, the anger at David for the lie, the guilt of betraying me by keeping the secret, and the overwhelming fear of the future. I wanted to tell you every day, she wept, her hand clutching mine. You're the only one who feels real. But Dad was so scared. He made me promise. And Mom, she's so fragile. I was terrified of destroying everything, of losing everyone. She admitted that seeing Sarah, alive and well but so different from the saintly image she cherished, had messed with her head, making her question every memory and every feeling she'd ever had. You are my real mom, she sobbed, clinging to me like she had as a child. You're the one who was there for everything. But she's my mother too, and she's alive. And she's having a baby. A baby I'm supposed to be a sister to. I don't know who I am anymore. In that moment, any anger or hurt I felt towards her vanished, replaced by an overwhelming surge of protective love. I held my daughter, the one I had raised, the one whose heart was breaking under the weight of a truth she never asked for, and I made a decision. The lie had done enough damage. It had stolen enough. It was time to stop the cycle. It was time to build something new, something agonizingly raw but based on truth. The ending wasn't neat or simple. It was messy and painful, a slow, arduous reconstruction. David and I separated for a time. He moved into a small apartment and started intense therapy to deal with the deep-seated guilt and shame that had dictated his life for over a decade. I went to therapy too, to process the profound betrayal and to learn how to trust again. The hardest, most painful conversation of our lives was with Sarah's parents, who finally, with tears of their own, admitted their part in the lie, their faces etched with a lifetime of regret for a decision made in a moment of panic. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to rebuild. Megan decided to keep the baby. She moved back home with me for the last part of her pregnancy, and we turned the guest room into a nursery, a project that became a tangible act of healing. I was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow when her son Liam was born. Seeing her become a mother herself with a clarity and honesty she herself had been denied, was a healing balm for us all. It gave her a new purpose, a new center of gravity. The most surprising and delicate development was my relationship with Sarah. Once the secrets were out in the open, we were able to meet cautiously as two women who loved the same daughter. There was no competition. How could there be? The roles were too clearly defined by history. I was the mother who had raised her, who had been there for the first period, the first heartbreak, the college applications. She was the mother who had given her life and had returned, fragile and remorseful, seeking redemption. We established careful, explicit boundaries facilitated by a wise family therapist. She is Liam's biological grandmother and I am his nana. David and I eventually reconciled, but our marriage is fundamentally different now, built on a hard-won, often painful honesty that was absent before. It's stronger, but it is also more scarred, like a bone that has been broken and has healed, forever changed but able to bear weight again. Megan's journey to motherhood, born from a secret pregnancy test that unlocked a decades-old secret, ultimately became the catalyst that forced our fractured family to tear down the painful fiction we'd been living and, brick by painful brick, build a more authentic, if infinitely more complicated, reality. The mother she thought was dead was back, a living, breathing person with flaws and regrets. But the mother she had always known was still there, steadfast and unwavering, ready to help her raise the next generation, not in the shadow of a lie, but in the challenging, liberating light of truth.